Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton. This is a managerial analysis on Duncan Ferguson. I'm here with Patrick Gillen and Paul McAllister. Welcome both to you. I'm going to start off with getting your initial reaction on the news a couple of weeks ago when Ancelotti left. I just want to know your initial thoughts of when it happened.
Sorry,
go on, mate. Sorry, mate. The floor's yours. Go on.
I was just going to say, after that game against City, it was just almost a relief that the season had ended. And you're thinking, here we go. At least there's a summer without Everton disappointment. And then there it was. There was the news. Ancelotti had sort of screwed us over a bit there. I mean, obviously he had his reasons for going, and you could sort of understand it if it was an up and coming manager. I think it just hurts more. It was more the words that he'd been saying, the sound bites, how much he loved Crosby and all this stuff. And we tried to buy into it, but now looking back, now the dust has settled, it's more of a, what was he any good really? Would we have been fuming if that was anybody else putting in them performances towards the end of the season, especially? So it's disappointing, but it's almost exciting now that we can, at least there's a bit of interest this summer anyway that we can get excited about.
I tend to agree. I mean, if it wasn't Carlo Ancelotti, if it was any other manager putting in the performances we saw in the second half of the season, then I think there'd be a lot more calls for that manager to have been bulleted. But the fact that it was Ancelotti, the fact that people trusted him because he had the CV to back it up, and he was someone who you think, if it doesn't work out with this fella, then what is really the option? Then everyone was willing to buy into everything he was saying and put up with the bad stuff that came with the good stuff. And there was positives and negatives to his season, one that just gone. When he left, it was more just deflation type thing. It's like, as you've just mentioned, we bought into all this. Oh, I love the area where I live. I'm happy. I want to be at a club where there's a lot of emotion involved and that the supporters really make you feel at home. I don't want to be a place where it's just, we only like it if you're winning. We bought into that hook, line and sinker, and that's just a lesson for our fan base, isn't it? That these managers, when they're from all around Europe and they've been here, there and everywhere, they're not suddenly just going to fall in love with your club just because they like the area they live in. And I mean, I'm sure that was sincere. I'm sure he does like Crosby and he was enjoying his life, but he was never going to turn down the opportunity to go back to the biggest club in the world. He can't like Crosby that much. So it's just deflating when he left, and just that feeling of, oh, here we go again. We've been on this carousel so many times. We're just sick of it now. How many times have we been in a scenario where it hasn't worked out with another manager, or that other manager's left the club under bad circumstances, and we're just having to scratch around and bring someone in to replace him? And no matter who it is, I think Ancelotti was the only example of a manager we brought in where everyone was universally happy. All the other managers we've got in the past 6-7 years all had detractors, and I'm sure the next manager, whoever he is going to have detractors as well. I think we just all thought we were past that point and we could have a rest from worrying about the manager for a while, but clearly not. So,
well, you mentioned about new managers coming in, and obviously today we're discussing one potential candidate in Duncan Ferguson. So I'll start with you, Patrick. What's your initial thoughts to the rumours that Duncan Ferguson could get the job?
I'd almost like to, not that Duncan Ferguson's a man that needs any defending, but I'd almost like to defend him, because I've seen, I know it's talk sport and they try and drum up a lot of controversy there deliberately. But Simon Jordan sort of said he's going to be a one-trick pony if Everton get him in, and try to warn Machining not to go for that. But I disagree, to be honest. I think he's got all his coaching badges, he's been here for 7 years. He's seen a lot of different managerial styles. He has been around. So I think if it wasn't Duncan Ferguson, there wasn't this sort of perception of him, of the man who he is, and he's a tough guy and he'll just be sort of Mike Bassett style screaming at the players in the change room, which we all sort of like, have that image of him dragging people up against the wall. Like, at least he, there's that thing, at least he does get the club and he is passionate, but I think he's more than that. I think it's harsh to suggest that. And when he came in to replace Marco Silva, we weren't in a good way. He sort of had to fight. He had to fight the fires there, really. We'd just been spanked at Liverpool and, that 5-2 game. And he came in and he was unbeaten against, it was looking pretty dodgy at that time. We had Chelsea, obviously Man United away. I think we lost on pens to Leicester, didn't we? But technically he was unbeaten during that time. And I think I think he's almost unlucky with the timing of this, because I think if Ancelotti left mid-season, he'd get that chance to sort of show him. I have another interview at it, almost like on the job. But because it's at the start of the summer and we've got time and other candidates, there's so many managers available right now. I personally don't want Duncan Ferguson now. I don't think he's ready now, but I also would like to, I don't think it'd be an absolute travesty if he did get it, and we should get behind him if he was to get it, essentially.
No worries, Paul.
The thing with Duncan is, and it was the same with Unsworth before him when he had that little go as a caretaker. If he were to get the job, it would just kind of confirm to all the supporters that the club don't really have a plan, and that the club doesn't know what it wants to be, and it's essentially just giving it to the first person who'll put his hands up and say, yeah, I'll have it. It would be deflating to think that the club's still operating that way, because I know he's got all his badges and he's fully qualified to be a manager, but Everton should be too big a club where you can't walk into it as a novice. I can't think of any other club or any other big club that considers itself a big club where that happens. The only other one in recent memory is Arteta down at Arsenal, and look how that's going. It's basically gone pear-shaped, hasn't it? And the longer they leave Arteta in there, the worse it's going to get for whoever eventually replaces him. It's bizarre. I like Duncan as a person. I'm happy for him to stay at the club in some capacity if he wants that. But I think it's reached the point now where Duncan himself has to decide, what does he want? Does he want to be a manager? Because if he does want to be a manager, if he wants that to be his career, then I think he's going to have to go elsewhere and cut his teeth, prove himself. If he doesn't want to do that, if it's okay, I'm happy just being the person in the background, I'm happy being the assistant or the striking coach or whatever, then God bless, I'd be happy for him to stay there the rest of his life. But if he were to put his hands up and say, no, I've decided that I want the Everton job now, then I think someone should say to him, well, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get the Everton job unless you go off into the football and wider world and prove yourself, because that's what managers have to do. Ryan Giggs has done it at United, or when he was at United, wasn't he? When they sacked Louis van Gaal, Mourinho came in, and Giggs said to himself, right, if I want to get this job one day, I can't just stay here and be an assistant or whatever. I'm going to have to go out into the world and prove to the Man United supporters and the Man United hierarchy that I am good enough and capable enough of being a manager who gets this on merit rather than emotion. And I think more managers should do that rather than just being part of the furniture. So if Ferguson gets it, I'd get behind him, because you just have to, don't you? But I just think it would be so short-sighted and so, I don't want to say depressing, but it would just be it would reinforce that suspicion that a lot of us have got, that the board don't really know what they're doing when it comes to making crucial decisions. They're just guessing and hoping for the best.
No problem. I was going to say the consensus I've seen is that he needs to go out and earn a couple of badges before he takes it. If you're Duncan Ferguson, where do you realistically think would be a good place for him to go? Do you think he'd stay England in the lower leagues, go to Scotland potentially? We'll start with you, Patrick.
Similar to you look at Steven Gerrard going to Scotland, and obviously that's one of the two big ones. I know the Celtic job's available, but I suppose when you're thinking about it, would Celtic even give Duncan Ferguson the job? When you do try and take the emotion out of it, which is, it's hard not to become emotive when you're talking about Ferguson, but if a club like Celtic wouldn't give him the job, then should we be giving him the job? It's like I said, I don't think he's quite ready, but I just don't think. I mean, managers such as Gerrard and Lampard, they've been given a chance with little experience. I mean, if you are going to be good enough for the job, I mean, how else are we to know, really, unless he was given that chance with us, but it's difficult to say, because when he was in that period, I think he was sort of 4-4-2, wasn't he? High energy, and I can see why people would think he is sort of like living off the passion, just getting the players to run that, and I don't know if that's sustainable. I think what it is that Brands, Mashiri, they have to decide where we're actually going next with this. I mean, are we going to try and change the style of play? Because Ancelotti wasn't really, you didn't know him stylistically as a manager, how he got his teams to play. It was more that he got the best out of players. So are we after someone that's going to try and get the best out of the squad we've got now? Or is it going to be this complete, let's start, passing out from the back a bit more and change the actual tactics of it? I suppose I think Paul's right. We don't really know what Duncan Ferguson is as tactically as a manager just off those 4 games. So if he was to go somewhere, I mean, even if he went to the Championship or in Scotland, I don't know if you'd then want to take him next time around. I still that'd be a bit too soon. I think people have got to sort of take their chance, get in there at the top and go for it, really. I mean, you saw Pirlo, it sort of failed at Juve, won a trophy, but I mean, players can go straight into management and become a success of it. You see, like the sort of Pep Guardiola style, but if you don't get that chance, it's hard to then prove yourself at a lower club because it's not quite the same, is it?
No. So go on, Paul.
Where would Dunc go if he did go out and cut his teeth in management? It's a good question, that, isn't it? Because he's been in the game for a long while, hasn't he? But I've never really seen his name linked to other jobs whilst he's been on the Everton coaching staff. Whereas someone like Unsworth, periodically, he does get linked places, and then whether there's anything in those rumours and he just turns it down, or we don't know. But it's hard to picture Ferguson at any other club in any other capacity, isn't it? Because he's so tied to Everton. I mean, the Championship, I think there's a good argument from going down there, and I think he probably could bag himself a Championship job, especially at the lower end, a club that just maybe needs a manager who backs up against the wall and inspire them. That could do all right. But if he went up to Scotland and he went that route, I think that would be more interesting. But again, what would be the right club for him up in Scotland? He wouldn't get the Celtic job because of the Rangers connection. He's a former Rangers player, and I just don't think the Celtic fans would have that, even if he was a well-renowned name. Rangers, it doesn't look like Gerrard's leaving there this summer. Otherwise, that would probably be a good fit. Don't know, Aberdeen, Hibernian, Hearts. I mean, I'm not going to lie and pretend I'm an expert on that league. I don't know where those clubs are in terms of closing the gap to on the other two. But Ferguson, I do want to see him go out and cut his teeth somewhere, because it would be really interesting, because Everton is a very particular fit, isn't it? There's a lot of managers who would do well at other clubs who wouldn't do well at Everton. And there's a lot of managers who would probably do well at Everton who don't do well typically at other clubs, like Howard Kendall, like even to an extent David Moyes. I know he's turned it around this season at West Ham, hasn't he? But before that, you'd have to go back to Preston to find another job where Moyes flourished other than Everton. So it's interesting, but if Ferguson went out into the managerial world, I think his most likely landing place is up in Scotland or maybe somewhere in the Championship. And if he could get a team that's struggling somewhere in the Championship and gets them up towards the playoffs or even promoted, then I think he does his credibility an enormous amount. I mean, Wayne Rooney's down there at Derby and he's trying to make a good fist of it, isn't he? But we're seeing already that just because he's a big player and he's got a lot of passion doesn't automatically translate into him knowing what he's doing tactically, because he's getting absolutely pelted down at Derby, and it doesn't look like he's going to last too much longer, not as the season starts. Whereas you can take other managers, and Lampard did really well at Derby, didn't he? Gerrard's flying up at Rangers. There's been others as well who've dropped down to the lower leagues and have done well for themselves. So it'd be interesting. So if Ferguson, as I touched on it, if he's happy to just put his hand down and say, no, I'm not going for this big job, I don't see myself as the Everton manager, and I just want to be a coach and I'm happy to step in where I'm needed, then I've got no problem with that. No problem at all. Give him a lifetime contract to be the striking coach, because he's clearly a good coach in that sense. He's brought Dominic Calvert-Lewin on loads, but I think Ferguson needs to look in the mirror and say to himself, what do I want out of the rest of my career in football? Do I want to just be a backroom member at Everton, or do I want the big seat for myself? And if it's the second answer, then I think he's going to have to go out and cut his teeth, because I'll go back to my point before, it's just not right at a club the size of Everton that you can get the job just because you've been there for a long time, part of the furniture. You have to earn the job. And I know he did well in that caretaker spell, but 4-5 games, whatever it was, that's not enough to prove that you are good enough to manage a club like Everton. Not for me, anyway.
No problem. I think it's a great point you made about him not being linked, and sometimes I think his dedication and association with us kind of goes against him in that way. Clubs not looking at him because it's kind of like, would he leave Everton to join us? But you both mentioned it slightly on about when he took over and the style of play he sort of brought. And like Patrick said, he brought 4-4-2. We were aggressive. I think it was like 37 tackles against Chelsea, the most that an Everton team had made in over a decade in one game. And it made me beg the question, what is Everton's style of play? Do you see it being, the traditional 4-4-2, high pressing, lots of cross balls into the box to a big striker? And if that's the case, is Duncan Ferguson the best manager we're linked with currently for that? Or would you go for someone like Galtier, who's just won the league with Lille? I'll start with you, Paul.
I mean, I would personally like to see the first option because that's just fundamentally Everton, isn't it? That's a style of play that every Everton fan can relate to and can get behind. And I'm not going to be an expert and say that I know all the styles of play of all the managers that we're linked with, but I would really like a manager who has that idea in mind for the team. Lots of crosses into the box, big aggressive striker, getting his head on things, and kind of up and at 'em type style where the flow of the game is very, very fast. So I think I'd really enjoy that. But if it was a case of Ferguson is the only manager who will bring that, then that would be enough for me to agree that Ferguson should get the job, personally. Galtier, he's just done really well at Lille, hasn't he? But again, I'm not really sure what his style of play is. Is he pragmatic? Is he expansive? Does he like crosses? Does he like lots of passes along the floor? Is he organised? Is he open? I just don't know. But I really hope that we get a manager who is willing to go for the first thing. And I'd be more than happy for Ferguson to be in the background and helping with that. I really would. But if it's a case of you can only have that style of football if you appoint Ferguson, then it's not enough for me to get him the job.
No problem. Patrick?
In terms of style, I think we're being too almost passive out of possession, which, I mean, the problem is if you get someone in with a certain philosophy like we had with Martinez, and it did work initially because there was a blend with the Moyes defence, and is when there's a certain philosophy, a manager can often be stubborn at times, and when it's not working, it's just, it got to a point that was like, I think it was like 12 months, 18 months where the fans were hating it and it just wasn't going to change. And you knew every time we'd have like, I think there was Kone sort of playing off the left, and you saw the same thing every time he got found out in that second season. So it's basically someone with a bit more pragmatism. We sort of found a way last season under Ancelotti to win away against teams that we knew were better than us. So we allowed them to sort of play, and then we play to our strengths. And where we seem to fall is when the onus was on us. So I think it's more in those games. It's more creating a style of when you to try and sort of be the better side. I think recruitment's really important with this when it comes to like philosophy of which manager we want. We obviously need a coach that is tactically able to pull off. It's also keeping possession, but also like we can play in the counter attack at Anfield, at Stamford Bridge, etc. to win points. Like sacrifice the style almost if it comes to trying to get into those Champions League places, not to just gift results to teams just purely based on philosophy. It's hard to think who could do that really. I think it's not just about being. I do think we need to play some better football than we did last season. The Newcastle game, and there's so many spring to mind where it was like players on the pitch. I know we've had this sort of let's play thing. Ancelotti apparently came out and said, well, someone like Graham Potter seems to have a style up to the striker, and the theory is that if he had a good striker, the expected goals would turn into actual goals. I don't know if that's true or not. That seems like, as we mentioned off camera before, Connor have fallen into the Martinez trap again. That's something I don't want to follow down. I think we tried to get Koeman in just because he was a name, and we tried again with Ancelotti and we failed again. So it's trying not to make that same mistake twice. I do think off the ball we are too passive, which is why I was worried about Nuno as well, because you're looking at they're the opposite to Wolves, with the opposite to sort of that Bielsa style, getting up and at them. And I think especially with the fans being back in Goodison, you could sort of allow it on your TV, a sort of passive game, but we need to get at teams and put them under. And it's especially putting these teams away in games that we should win, but we sort of need to have more control over that. So I think tactically, I'd rather start to sort of transform to a more possession-based team. But it's recruitment really where that will lie. So we need a coach that is going to allow Brands to sort of be the guy who's bringing the players in, because Ancelotti sort of brought in Alan, and James Rodriguez, and they were clearly Ancelotti signings. But that doesn't really fit the mold now. Now we're sort of left behind. I'm not saying Alan's not a good player and he's not going to become a great player next season as well. But it needs to be a consistent model of recruitment, I think, from now. And it's signing a manager that is actually tactically aware, that we can sort of maybe leave the recruitment side to brands. If that is the model, we need to decide and then go for that model rather than keep chopping and changing, trying something different each time. That's what I believe.
No problem. Well, I was going to say, as you mentioned about transfers and obviously leaving it to brands, it looks like brands is already making moves in the window. So it looks like Everton might be fully ready for just leaving that to Marcel Brands to do. But it does bring me on to a good point of, Duncan Ferguson and his inexperience of managing. Do you think his inexperience of actually going out and buying players could hinder him? Or do you think with the way we're setting up now with brands, that could actually lead to him getting the job? If he's got someone there who's got a bit more of a know-it-all about the transfer window. I'll start with you, Paul.
I think that would probably go in Ferguson's favour, because every other manager we've had post Moyes was very, very specific in what he wanted for his teams, other than Allardyce, who wasn't really here long enough. But Koeman was very specific about what he wanted. He wanted players who had high energy and were athletic and were quite fast, players like Balassi, players like what's he called, Sigurdsson. I mean, God knows what he thought he was getting with him, but Koeman was very specific about the type of players he wanted, and it was just muddled up thinking, wasn't it? We had Walsh buying this player, Ken Wright bringing Rooney back, Koeman wanting this guy, and then again it was the same thing with Marco Silva. Marco Silva wanted Richarlison. Marco Silva wanted Toure as well. Couldn't get him while Silva was here. He wanted Zuma back. We couldn't get Zuma past the loan. And now that Ancelotti came, obviously he had his own ideas. He wanted James, he wanted Alan. I'm glad if any manager we get, whether it's Ferguson or Graham Potter or someone else, I'd be very happy if that person just sat back and was happy to just be head coach. That's all my job is. I'm not here to have any input on the transfers. I'd like to be told who we're going for and how they think they'll fit into the team. But I think it would go in Ferguson's favour if he did just say, right, I'm keeping my head down. It's nothing to do with me who we're buying, and you just call me when we've basically got the player coming in for a medical. I think that will go in Ferguson's favour, or any manager's favour if they're happy to do that. When managers kind of want to have a say and be in the room when the transfer targets are getting discussed, I understand why they want to do that. But I think the days of having a manager who kind of oversees everything at the club, from the recruitment to the youth academy to the first team squad, those days are dying out now. There's not many clubs that have that figure that are still successful. There's one or two, but the majority of them fall into the latter category now, where there's a director of football who is in charge of basically everything football related at the club, other than picking the team and doing the training sessions during the week. So I want a manager who is happy to just take a complete backseat, and he'll accept any player that Brands wants to bring into the club, which I think Ferguson would do, is my point. I think if Ferguson was called up and told by Brands, for example, right, we're signing Max Aarons, or we're signing Basuma, or we're signing this guy, or we're bringing Moise Keane back, we're playing him next season, we're not selling him to PSG, I think Ferguson would just nod his head and go, okay, I'll work with whatever you give me. And I'd be happy for any manager to do that. Whereas some are obviously going to want to have the power of veto, aren't they? And I just don't think that's the way to go.
No problem. Patrick?
Yeah, I agree with Paul there, really. I think it would be helpful. I think it would protect the sort of project, as we keep hearing every year, if that was the case from now. Because otherwise it seems like we're in transition every year and we keep starting again. And but part of the allure with Ancelotti, and we all sort of like fell for it now with hindsight, is that he could attract those big names and James Rodriguez, and that was like certainly really exciting when we did sign him. You wonder if Ferguson was in charge, would he have that pull? And I don't think he would have that pull. There's not many managers who would, though, in fairness, but I just think they're just more cautious now, that putting a manager on a really high salary. I mean, the salaries are enough to attract any manager in the world now. You can see that pretty much, by the ones that are at the sort of Super League clubs. But yeah, I don't think Ferguson will have that pull in terms of the market. and it's right as Paul said. If we can get someone in who's sort of the head coach, and we sort of try and implement a style of play, I just want to see a bit of pragmatism as well. I mean, I think that was part of what we enjoyed when Ferguson came in. He had a tough squad to actually deal with to get on the pitch. He had to put Holgate in midfield, but he still got all the team playing as a team together. Men were arriving in the box, which is what we needed, and he wasn't afraid to mix it up. And I think you need that. You need a bit of that sometimes. I don't want it to just be pure philosophy. In terms of the transfer market, I think there's already a big appeal to come to Everton for a lot of these young players, because it's painful to say, but we are sort of a stepping stone for a young, hungry player. You've seen it so many times where a player can come in and advance their career, and even managers are coming in and advancing their career. And it's a model that will sustainably keep us without this transition constantly. Obviously, you're going to have to sell players, but they should be at a profit, really. We should only really be signing players at a certain age, a certain profile now. And I think that was supposed to be the plan. But then we jump back from the plan because a manager comes in, he overrules it, and then there's a bit of, is this head coach working? But have we really tried it? Have we really given it a go with Brands sorting the recruitment out? I don't think we have, really, to be honest.
No problem.
I'll just chip in. There's nothing worse as well when you get reminded of the fact whenever a new manager comes in, that whenever the commentators are talking, saying, right, well, we've got a Martinez era player, we've got a Koeman era player, we've got a Silva era player, we've got a Ancelotti era player. We're going to have more of that now that we're on another new manager. That kind of needs to stop. We need to just have it all under one umbrella, where all our signings are Brands signings. They're not the head coach's signings. And when the new head coach, if one has to come in, has to deal with them. These are all signings that the director of football made. And if you're going to take the job, you have to accept that that's the squad that the director of football is going to give you to work with. Whereas it just seems that it's just been such a chop and change over the last 6-7 years that whoever comes into the job is basically just starting with a bowling ball tied to the feet, because we're clearly going to have a lot of players there who they're not interested in using. They would never have allowed them to be signed at their own clubs, and they're probably not going to be able to get them out the door as quickly as they'd like to. So Brands has to be in complete control of all signings. He has to be the person who gets the final say. And if rumours are to be believed, over the last few years, he's not been the final person to have the final say. It's been Shiri is sticking his oar in here and there. Ken Wright's brought back Rooney, obviously. The managers have had their own agendas, bringing in players that they know and trust. So from now on, Marcel Brands has got to be the absolute king when it comes to deciding who comes into the club and who leaves the club. No one should be at Everton unless Marcel Brands has approved it.
No problem. I was going to get on to obviously Simon Jordan on TalkSport. Patrick, you mentioned it earlier on, has come out and said, about Duncan Ferguson embodying the club, but that's not enough, and almost did say he was like a one-trick pony. I just want to get your opinions on this, because obviously when he was manager, I don't think anyone, you could argue, gets the club more than him at the minute. He wore Howard Kendall's watch. He seems to have a great relationship with a lot of the players, especially the younger ones, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Tom Davis. I think we saw, obviously, has quite a tight relationship there. I was just wondering, do you think Simon Jordan's criticism of spirit can only take you so far as a manager is fair, or do you think Duncan Ferguson does offer slightly more than just spirit?
Yeah, I think it is unfair, but I think what he's saying is almost fair. That if you were, the criticism that's sort of being labelled at Ferguson, if he was just this sort of passion guy who's coming in and he's sort of, yes, he does get the club, he does have those qualities, but I think the fact is we don't actually know what he would be like if he had this job. Which is partly why I'd be tempted to find out, but obviously you can't. I mean, everything is a gamble, but this would be a gamble. It could backfire on the club, on Ferguson himself. We don't know if he does want it, but I just think it's unfair. He came in and those, he did, as we mentioned, he did go 4-4-2 and sort of go a bit more direct, and they had to dig in. But as I say, he was having to play Holgate in midfield. He didn't have pre-season with the team. He didn't have time to put his own style, whatever that would be, and we don't know what that would be. And I think that's why as Paul was saying, is why he can't really get it at a club like Everton. He shouldn't get it because he hasn't gone out and had that time. But no, I think that's harsh. I don't think that would be labelled at another manager that had 7 years experience as another person who had 7 years experience as a assistant manager, had his coaching badges and was actually successful and helped steady the ship when he came in. I just think it's sort of an easy thing to say about Ferguson himself, just because of this aura that he has around him. I disagree. I disagree there with Simon Jordan. Yeah,
no problem, Paul.
I get what Simon Jordan was sort of trying to say. I think he could have worded himself a bit better. But I one trick pony is not the right term, because we don't know what Ferguson's trick is. He's not had the opportunity to show us whether he's got more than one trick. But I do agree that just hoping that a manager is going to instill emotion in the team, and just having emotion is automatically going to make the team better over a long spell, like a full season, it's not the right thinking for me, because he did well in that, what was it, like 4-game caretaker spell, was it? Was it 4 games?
Yeah.
And he didn't lose, yeah, but for me, we only really played well in one of those games, and that was Chelsea at home, the first one. The second one was United away, where we got a point. We got the early goal. I think it was a De Gea own goal with like a fluke off a cross or something like that, and it hit De Gea and went in. And then we were basically under the cosh for the entire game, and we conceded one late from Mason Greenwood. But you know, we got a point that we probably deserved on the day. It was a very good point, but we didn't play well in terms of we took the game to United, and we had United worried that we were going to put them away. Not at all. We just basically got a goal and then tried our best to defend it. Then I think we played Leicester in the cup, did we?
Yeah.
And we were second best in that game completely over the 90 minutes. We only got to penalties because Bain scored an absolute whale deep in stoppage time that no one saw coming. So we didn't really play well in the Leicester game, and even though we got to penalties and were unlucky not to go through. And then the final game, the one where Ancelotti was been announced and was sat in the stands, was against Arsenal, where Arteta had been announced for Arsenal and he was sat in the stands as well. And that was one of the worst games I've ever been to. Both sides, just absolutely rubbish. And if if Arsenal were in the state they were, if they'd have announced Arteta a week before that, and he'd had a week to get them on the training ground, I think Arsenal would have put us to the sword that day. We were really poor, honestly. We were just lucky that they were just as poor as us, because they were going through the exact same thing. They had a lot of uncertainty around the club, and a manager who'd been announced but hadn't had time to really get on the training ground and do anything yet. So I'm pleased with what he managed to do in that caretaker spell. He got his precious points when we needed them, and he got everyone up and kind of up for the fight again. He got everyone connected with the club at a time where apathy was threatening to take over. But in terms of what he showed us tactically and what he could set the team up to do, he did one or two things that were interesting, like putting Holgate in midfield and going for the 4-4-2, which was something that Silva certainly wasn't doing beforehand. But I don't think we played like this brilliant football that made me think, oh, if we did this over the course of a season, I think we'd be absolutely flying. Not for me personally. So which leads me back to my point earlier on, that I think if Duncan Ferguson wants to be a manager, then Duncan Ferguson needs to go out and prove that he can basically be a good tactician. He's got great in-game management, that he's got the ability to read an opposition and set up to stop them, that he can pick the right formation in every game, that he can know what players to drop when they're out of form, what players to take off when they're not having a good game, because he caused a stir when he took Moise Keane off, didn't he? Now, that's a whole other video. Some people agree with him doing that, some people don't, but I think there's too many question marks there for me. There wasn't enough answers that we were given in that 4-game spell to let me think that Duncan Ferguson could, if he took over any job, never mind Everton, could basically set a team up to be successful over the course of a season.
No problem. Like you say, yeah, he did the Moise Keane thing. I was going to say is one that polarized opinions. Some, said that he wasn't putting any effort. A lot questioned the man management, that would take him straight back off 10 minutes. But I think we'll leave that one at here or there, because that's one that tends to split people. I was wondering about your opinions on, there's a lot of people saying this is a risk, not just for the club, but for Duncan Ferguson himself, and the fact that he's a legend at the club. If it goes wrong, say now, I don't know, it goes wrong, we're in a really bad spot come January, do you think the board are going to then struggle, and the fans are going to have a bit of a struggle with getting rid of him? Because it could see him leave the club permanently. And what sort of position does that put the board in? Could that tarnish a legacy if fans start to turn and he's been kept too long? I just want to get your opinions. I'll start with you, Paul.
I mean, it's a good point, but I don't think so. I don't think the board would struggle, at least not the board members with the power, because Mishiri has shown he's not afraid to give the manager the axe, even when it's going to cost them a lot of money. And if he, let's heaven forbid, Ferguson got the job and it was going very badly, I don't think Mishiri would have any problem axing Ferguson, because it probably likely wouldn't cost them much, would it? So Mishiri's shown that even when it's not in his interests to do it, his financial interests, that he'll still sack a manager and start again. So I don't think he'd have any problem with sacking Ferguson. The fans, I think it would be a real drag. It would get a lot of people down if Ferguson failed at the job and we had to part company. But I think our fans it wouldn't tarnish his legacy. I think our fans would still love him regardless. I think our fans deserve the benefit of the doubt like that. We're not like United, who look what they're doing with Solskjaer. Solskjaer's scored a Champions League winning goal for them. He's a bona fide legend, probably one of their top 5 players of all time in terms of what he achieved and what he brought to the club. He belongs right up in the upper echelon of Man United legends, and they're ringing up like phone-ins, like TalkSport, and they're all over social media slating him, calling him everything, saying he's a clown and he's this and he's that. But that's not Everton fans' way. I don't think Ferguson would have to suffer that, where fans are calling him everything and kind of saying he's ruining his legacy. I don't think that would happen. I think if Ferguson left the club because he wasn't good enough, then within 6 months, everyone would still be singing his songs and loving him again. And what he achieved as a player would still be what everyone remembers, not his managerial spell. So I don't think so. I think if he was brought in and then we had to part company with him, I don't think the board would have any problem doing it. At least Mishiri wouldn't, and Mishiri's the one who ultimately makes the decision. And I don't think the fans would hold out against Ferguson at all. I think fans would be heartbroken that it's not worked, but they'd still love him anyway, and they'd still welcome him back.
Patrick?
Yeah, I don't think it'd tarnish his legacy, just because of the sort of man he is and already what he's established at the club. But I think it's right. I almost think it'd work against him, like the fact that, or maybe it's more as an experience, but I think if things have started to go wrong in the early season, I think we'd probably panic earlier because it's him and his inexperience, and he probably wouldn't be given as much time as bringing a new man in would probably get the time. But we've seen with Rooney coming back, that was sort of a decision made on emotion and nostalgia, and Mishiri shipped him out without even telling Wayne he wasn't gonna be staying. So I don't think there's any I don't think there'd be any issue there with moving him on if things weren't working out. He'd almost lose this sort of job for life that he seems to have in there, that he seems to survive every managerial sacking and these things. If he'd be gambling that almost if he was the main man, because he couldn't just go back to being number 2 then. That'd be his gamble really. But there'd always be the sort of like ambassador role, I'm sure, the sort of Graham Sharp type role if management's not his thing. But I mean, he's put a lot of years into it, and it looks like that's what he wants. And it's like you said, it's like he only wants the Everton job. Like that's what he wants. That's what he's built for. Maybe maybe it'd just work, but obviously that's pure. It's pure emotion, really, that would say yes to this. I think going through what we've been through, I feel like it would just be a pure emotional decision for Duncan to get it. He wouldn't be ruining any legacy. I think he'd just be gambling, becoming a bigger legend, if anything, if things did go his way.
Yeah, it would be similar to what happened with Kendall. I mean, it didn't work out for Kendall in his second or his third reigns, did it? But that's not what anyone remembers him for. Everyone remembers him for the glory years. Ferguson, as you said, it seems like he only wants the Everton job, but it goes back to my point of, well, I'm sorry, but that's not realistic. If you want the Everton job, you have to do well in another job to prove you deserve the Everton job. At least that's the attitude I think all Evertonians should have. And if he got the job and it went sour very quick, then it would split the fan base as well, because you're going to get the fans who are going to say, I told you so, he shouldn't have got him in the first place, what a joke, blah blah blah. And then you're going to get the fans who love him, who are saying it's not his fault, he's been hamstrung, the board have let him down, Brands has let him down with the signings, he only took the job because no one else wanted it, don't blame him. And I don't want any more Evertonians arguing over stuff like this. I just think it's a gamble that we just can't take because we've made too many decisions based on emotion, and too many of them haven't come off, like bringing Rooney back, like bringing Kendall back for the second and third reigns. Like, there's other examples, isn't there? Just with a club that seems to just make decisions based on emotion, and it always seems to blow up in our face. We need to be a club that starts making decisions based on logic, because that's what all the top clubs who achieve things do, essentially.
No problem. So before we put it to a close, I thought I'd ask one last question. Just out of curiosity, who would both of your ideal managers be to take over right now? We'll start with you, Patrick.
Such a tough one, this. It's almost like every person that's presented, you sort of I'm picking it apart, saying no, don't want him. I didn't want Nuno because I felt like they were too. Every time I watched Wolves, it was slow. It was almost lethargic. But you could put that to Everton's team last season as well. The temptation of Moyes as well, but again, I don't think he would do it. I think he's got a bit of principle about him, and he has agreed that 3-year contract with West Ham. I don't think he would do it. Again, it's a changing at the start. I wouldn't be too against Graham Potter, as mentioned, but it's a difficult one. I know who I don't want. Don't want Rafa Benitez. Don't want Eddie Howe, because I think that falls down the Martinez trap. I think Graham Potter's got a bit more. Like when we played against Brighton, even in that 0-0. They were the better side. I know we were a bit like hamstrung in terms of injuries, but it was also very difficult to create. So I remember, I know it's just based off one game, but we've seen them over the season. All we had was that Iwobi chance at the end and his left foot over the bar. I think they're a bit more pragmatic. It's a bit less Eddie Howe, where he's spending 30 million on Jordan Ibe, but he won't replace Steve Cook at the back, and they're just shipping 70 goals every season. I just don't want a stubborn person who's just setting a certain philosophy where everything's like, everything's rosy even when it's not. So I'd be tempted to try from abroad, really. The Lille manager that's just left, he's apparently done a deal with Nice. I don't know if that's true, but sort of a verbal agreement. So whether the sort of money and Premier League appeal could draw him, but it's like I say, he's done well to beat PSG over there, but I don't know what his style is. And there's the former Leipzig manager, it's Rangnick, isn't it? But he's been out of the game since 2016. But if this was 2016, that's probably something what we should have done, which may have avoided this sort of problem. Sort of brought a club up from this sort of style with buying younger players, the likes of like Timo Werner, and selling them on later down the line. So yeah, probably go for one of the ones from abroad, to be honest, if not Graham Potter.
Problem, Paul?
My first choice, I don't think he's many other people's first choice, but I would definitely like to see him come back to the Premier League and hopefully build Everton up. I'd like Mauricio Sarri, to be honest. And I've similar to Galtier with Nice. Apparently, he's got a deal all in place with Lazio. It's just basically waiting to be signed. But I think Sarri's one of Europe's most underrated managers. I think he did an absolutely brilliant job at Napoli. He basically built Napoli into a Champions League club. I know he doesn't get all the credit for that. Some people like to give it to Benitez, when Benitez didn't even finish in the Champions League with them. But Sarri basically made the Napoli team that we all know and respect. I think he went to Chelsea and did very well, considering that the players basically wouldn't buy into his methods and wouldn't try for him. Still got them in the top four, still got them a European trophy that they never looked like losing. They basically dominated the Europa League that season. I don't think they lost a game or even drew a game. And they absolutely smashed Arsenal in the final. And he probably would have won the League Cup as well if the goalie hadn't lost his head on the night, if anyone remembers. So Sarri, I think, is a manager who can build slowly. It didn't work out for him at Juventus, but again, he's done better than the manager they replaced him with, Pirlo, hasn't he? Sarri still won them a league title. But it seems like players won't buy into his methods. But I want a manager who will come in and he will instill his methods onto the team. I'm sick of players just thinking they can walk around and do whatever they feel like, which seems to be the way with Everton, and they'll turn up if they feel like it. I want a manager who will come in and say, no, you're doing what I tell you to do, or I'm going to discard you immediately. And I think Sarri would do that. There's pluses and negatives for every manager. I've seen people say we haven't got the players to play a Graham Potter or a Sarri possession-based style, but I'd rather bring a manager who wants to instill a style of play when I know for a fact that manager can make that style of play work, like we've seen with Sarri, we've seen to an extent with Graham Potter. He's not my first choice, but I think I could just about get on board with him if he was brought in. I could give him a chance, whereas if you brought Eddie Howe in, I suppose you've got to get behind every manager, but you couldn't convince me for 1 second it's ever going to work under someone like Eddie Howe. David Moyes is a no for me. David Moyes, we've had him at Everton before. We know what he would be as Everton manager. I just don't want to go back to those days. I think people are rewriting history a little bit on Moyes. They've always rewritten history on Moyes. The first few years after he left, when people were enamoured with Martinez, people were making out like Moyes was never that good for Everton. Whereas I think it's gone the other way now. I think because things have gone so pear-shaped the last 2 or 3 years, especially, people are starting to think it was better under Moyes than it actually was. I know it was good in terms of league finishes, but you've got to remember, we never won a single big away game under David Moyes. Never really even came close to winning a game at Anfield or Old Trafford or Chelsea under David Moyes. There was moments when he really upset the fans with his attitude at times. He upset certain players who he should have tried harder to have a relationship with because they were good players and it was to the benefit of the team. So it's a no for David Moyes. It's a no for Eddie Howe. It's, for me, a no for Rafa Benitez as well. Take away the Liverpool connection. I just don't think Benitez is a builder. Benitez hasn't kicked the club on since Valencia. He's went to Liverpool, won a few trophies, but only had 1 good season really in the league. Same with when he went to Napoli, won a few trophies, but didn't get them where he wanted to be in terms of league finishes. Went to Real Madrid, flamed out, awful. Went to Newcastle, didn't really pull up any trees at Newcastle. Steve Bruce has proved that now. I don't know why they all love Benitez and they all hate Steve Bruce when there's not much difference between the two sides. And obviously he had that little spell at Chelsea as well, where he had a world-class team. But Benitez is a no for me. I just don't think Benitez is a manager to kick on a team that's mid-table that wants to get into the European places, at least not anymore. But it would be just about a yes for Graham Potter. He's not my first choice, but I think I could swallow it and I could give him a few months to show me what he's all about. But I would really like Mauricio Sarri because I think Mauricio Sarri, if he's fully backed, is a winner. And I like his mentality of it's kind of me against the world type thing. I think he suits being an underdog. And Everton is very much an underdog, just like Napoli were in Italy. So I'd like some of that, please.
No problem. I was going to say, it's come to a point now where I think it's a lot easier to say no to certain, there's a longer list of managers you'd say no to than yes to, unfortunately, when I look at the list. Eddie Howe being the first one is a straight no. But we'll leave that there. I'd like to thank both you, Paul and Patrick, for being on. You've been absolutely brilliant. Don't forget, guys, to like the video, subscribe, share, comment down below who you'd like to take over, or comment down below on Duncan Ferguson, Everton, anything we've discussed in the video. And don't forget to follow us all on Twitter and Toffee Blues. I'm sure the links will be down in the description below. And see you guys in a bit.